The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar. I'm Robert Chakowski with On Demand Advisors, and today our topic is strategic positioning that accelerates revenue growth. As you can see, there's the concept of a red ocean on the left and a blue ocean on the right. This really started with Geoffrey Moore when he started talking about crossing the chasm and the zone to win, inside the tornado, the guerrilla game. And most recently, there's a book out called Blue Ocean Strategy, which I love. But really what it talks about is how do you create the blue ocean for yourself and for your company? So many of us today, whether we realize it or not, may be in a very crowded market, in a crowded industry. Many times we may find we lack differentiation against competitors. And so the question was, through strategic positioning, how do you change that? How do you literally create an ocean? How do you go win a market? We're going to talk about that today because it's really important. And we'll also be asking for your involvement throughout today's webinar. We'll have a number of polls. We want you to ask questions. We'll make sure we get through all the questions today. And if for some reason we have too many questions, which does happen from time to time, then I'll make sure I personally get back to you one-on-one and answer every question that you have. So again, let's make this interactive. This is really important webinar in terms of how you position your company for winning. How do you position your company in terms of talking to and engaging with decision makers? And how do you make sure that you are taking full advantage of the strategies that you have to go win a market? Just in terms of our background, Craig and I co-founded our company, On Demand Advisors, 12 years ago. And we created the company as a unique organization to help you in terms of revenue acceleration. So most companies do have some type of plan in terms of how they want to grow revenue. But as I found working with many decision makers, many CEOs, many business owners, the objective isn't to grow the revenue at 10% a year. The objective is to grow it at 25%, 30%, 100% a year. And so the question is, how do you do that? How do you do that in a predictable, consistent, and capital efficient way? And so that's what we've been doing in helping our executives that we work with do that for 12 years. And we've done it with hundreds of companies. In terms of our background, I've been a serial CEO in Silicon Valley, working with both public and private companies. And Craig has been a serial CMO, working with public and private companies, as well as doing some extraordinary work around branding and positioning that he's going to be leveraging in today's webinar. So when we start talking about branding and positioning, working with companies like Disney, Google, Levi Strauss, these are just some world leaders, world beaters in terms of experience that he has working with them. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to a rewarding program for you. And share a little bit about where we start with as we think through this. We start with what we call a revenue acceleration system. So every company, each of you that are attending today, you really need a revenue acceleration system. And what I mean by that is you need a connected way to look at how do you grow revenue. Many of us, when we create software, we create services, we create offerings, we have a strict framework, methodology that we follow to actually do that, to create it, to manifest it, to bring it to market. What we don't have is we don't have a playbook on how we're going to put it in our revenue acceleration system and ensure that we're getting the type of growth that we have. So for instance, if you're a private company and you take investment from professional investors like VCs or PEs, they're going to expect you to be growing the revenue at, let's say, 30% year over year. And they're going to expect that consistency without fail. If you're a public company, then your shareholders, your public shareholders, and the folks that are involved in terms of following your company from an investment perspective, they're going to be setting targets for you and with you as far as what you're expecting to meet. And so what you're really looking for is a foolproof way to do this. This is the revenue acceleration system. And Over 12 years ago, Craig and I put this into a company called Intact. Intact is a software as a service company providing financial applications, best of breed financial applications to the marketplace. And we did that across all companies, all industries. And we also partnered with Salesforce as we went to market for a integrated solution. So just in the number of years there, we added another 5,000 customers and 300 channel partners. And it was very successful putting this map in place, making it work day in and day out as operators. In fact, it was so successful then that the Sage Group came in and acquired the company for $850 million. So that was a great outcome for the company. And then, of course, we went on and did that at public companies. So what I'm saying today is that the map that you have in front of you today is something that we've proven not only as operators ourselves, but also working with many of you today that are attending today's webinar. So for today, we're going to talk about this one area that I have with my cursor right here, which is really outcome-focused messaging and positioning. How do you strategically position your company for success? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Next month, we're going to talk about these two areas here, which is your sales-driven website. So sales-driven website is how do you guide every person that comes to your website through the guided buying process, and how do you convert your visitors into prospects? So, and then the month after this, so that would be September and then October, we're going to talk about how do you get the right partner ecosystem and really work with the right partners in the right format to drive revenue growth through partnerships. So I hope you'll be able to join us in each of these webinars that we have coming up. So anyway, this is the framework that I wanted to share with you for today. And of course, as I said, we're going to focus just in this one area, the strategic positioning and messaging that's important to your company. So our agenda is, where are most of us today? Where are most B2B companies today? And we're going to discuss something called level 1, messaging and positioning, level 2, level 3, and level 4. And we're going to talk about how do you transform your company from one level to the next. Craig's going to talk about something that's really important, which is how do you validate this? So when we sit down and we work with the management team, or when you sit down and work with your management team, and you get everybody together and we put together the best positioning, the best messaging, that's still a set of assumptions. Until we go out there and interrogate that with your target stakeholders, your target audience, then you have the truth. So up until this point, we have assumptions. When you do this type of work that Craig's going to talk about in a little bit, which is buyer intelligence, then you really know that you validated this with your marketplace, and you really have the truth. So that's our agenda for today. To get started, let's describe how you feel about your positioning and messaging that you have today. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here and ask if you would be kind enough to participate in the poll. So I've just distributed the poll to you. So here's some ways to look at that. As you think about how do you describe your company today to prospects, partners, and the outside world, are you primarily focusing on features, functions, and advantages? Are you focusing on the challenges you help them address as well as the solutions that you provide? Are you focusing on the business process that you're optimizing for that prospect or for that company? Are you focused on outcomes and ROI? Or are you not really sure? How would you think about how you rank your messaging today? So take a moment and just, this is really good just to understand the audience, and we'll share this information with everybody that's on today's call. And we'll keep the poll open for just a little bit longer here, and this will be great. One of the things I'm going to do today too is I'm going to walk everybody through one of our clients that we work with. We're going to show you how we went from level 1 to level 4 messaging and what that meant for them as far as how that was manifested. Okay, let me close the poll and let me share the results with everyone. Okay, 22% of you stated that you currently focus on features, functions, and advantages today in terms of describing your service or your solutions. 43% stated that you focus on the challenges that you address and the connected value that you deliver. 17% stated that you focused on the business process that you help optimize. And 9% were split between focusing on outcomes and ROI, as well as not really sure how you focus on your messaging or categorize that today. So thank you very much for participating in that. That's fantastic. So we begin with Red Ocean. So one of our clients is Visibility Software out of South Carolina. They are a company that provides really phenomenal HR solutions. So talent management solutions. Think about recruiting, think about onboarding, thinking about training, thinking about managing the talent pool that a company has. That's really what they do. So when we began working with Visibility Solutions at the beginning, and we started doing some market assessment of where they were at and their competition, they offer really two solutions when we began working with them. They offer an applicant tracking system, and there are about 350 competitors out there that offer similar systems. And they also offer a training management system, which has over 850 competitors out there. So needless to say, you could say we started with a Red Ocean. A lot of noise, a lot of competition, a lot of parity, and even to some degree, commoditization. So the notion was, how do we move from a red to create their blue ocean? So I'm going to walk you through that process that we went through and the 4 stages that we went through with them. And it really is something that you can think about how to apply to your company. And we do this all the time through messaging workshop that we do with the management team, and really take them through these different stages to help fully develop out the messaging that they need to have as they're thinking through strategic positioning and messaging for their company. So let's talk about the 4 areas or 4 stages. You can think about these as elevators. So on the ground floor, we've got our solution or service, and we can fully describe out the features, the functions, the advantages. And that's something that everybody would benefit from. It's something that whether I'm a decision maker, whether I'm a middle manager, whether I'm a person that's using the service individually, I'm going to really resonate understanding what is the solution that you offer. So if we go take the elevator now to the 2nd floor, and we say, what's on the 2nd floor? Well, the 2nd floor is more at a management level, which is, that's great that you have this solution. It's great that you have this service. But the question really gets down to is, rather than tell me about all the features, functions, and benefits, what do you help me do in terms of addressing my business challenges or pains that I have today? And then not only that, help me understand if that's my headache, what's the aspirin that you're going to give to me? So what are your value propositions that you're connecting to these pains? So that's what I find on the 2nd floor. On the 3rd floor, as I take the elevator to the next level of strategic positioning and messaging, now I'm really talking about how do you help me optimize the business process that I have? And how do you deliver value across that value chain or that value process? So for instance, if you're providing a supply chain solution, you're really thinking about how do you help them optimize the entire supply chain from end to end that you involve with or control. And so it's a different perspective. It's not just talking about specific areas, it's talking about a connected process. And then if we take the elevator to the 4th floor, now we're talking about something that's really important to the decision makers. So the senior executives are thinking every day about outcomes. They're thinking about, where do I get return? How do I measure that return? And so it's a different strategy in terms of positioning to them. One of the things I mentioned in the outline for today's webinar is it's not often unusual that when you're working with selling your solution or service to the enterprise, you're going to work with a lot of people at different levels of the company. You may work with functional people in that area. You'll work with IT, you'll work with procurement, you'll work with senior management. But invariably, whatever they're thinking about buying from you and whatever you're thinking about selling to them, that's going to go to some senior level executive. And you may not even have FaceTime with that senior level executive. But in 5 minutes, they're going to make a decision about whether they fund your solution or not. And the challenge is if you don't have the strategic positioning and messaging for that senior executive, they're not going to see the value. So people below them may see the value, but they don't. And so consequently, that solution or that purchase may be next. So let me take you through these 4 levels. And we're going to use visibility software as an example as we work through this with them. And starting off, they've always really done a very phenomenal job talking about their recruiting and training solutions that they have. And so from a feature function advantage perspective, you could see in terms of we're helping them put in a sales-driven website, but the current website does a good job talking about capabilities. So here we're talking about on the recruiting side, we're going to help you manage your workflow alerts and your task for requisition approvals. And so that's going to be great. As far as onboarding these folks, we're going to get the new hires questionnaires and help them fill out all this information so that it's going to be digitally available within the company. And then from a overall perspective, we're going to ensure that you're tracking all of your EEO and OF, CCP, and compliance reporting within the system. So these are important features, functions, and advantages that their solution offers. And so that's important. So we don't want to ignore that level, but we also want to be able to elevate that level. So when we went through this process in terms of strategic positioning with visibility software, the next thing that we looked at is, okay, so let's step back and think about in these areas where you're helping a company, whether it's recruiting, whether it's onboarding, whether it's training, the talent that you're bringing into the company, what are really the business challenges that you're helping them address? And those business challenges could be tactical, they could be strategic, they could be both. And so what we help them do is sit down and really flush out all of the business challenges that they impact. And then how does their solution provide the aspirin, if you will, to the headache, which is what's the value proposition? So you can see here as we map this out with them that we went through this complete process with them to create the messaging hierarchy around level 2 positioning. So now we're really in good shape. I mean, how often have you gone to a website where somebody talks about all the benefits that they offer, but they never really start with the challenges? And I would say that most people today, the reason why they go out to the internet, the reason why they go to somebody's website is because they have specific challenges they're trying to get answers to. They have specific challenges they're looking for somebody to help them address. They're looking for solutions, but they want to know that you understand how to address their problem first. And so being able to map this out, the cause and effect, if you will, becomes really important in terms of the process that you go through. So let's say we've done this and we've now really done a good job. And this, by the way, is where most of you are, according to the poll that we had today. Let's go on to the next floor. Now we're going to go up to level 3. So level 3 is about optimizing the process. So in this case, every company has a recruiting process. And now what we're showing through this process-driven infographic is how does visibility software help you look at optimizing your recruiting process? All the way from new job openings, through the applications that you're taking, through the offer stages, and then bringing those folks aboard. And this is the recruiting process. If we look at then onboarding and bringing that talent aboard, then we look at what we're doing to actually help develop, deploy, grow, and manage these resources that you have within your company. So this is really the talent development perspective. So instead of talking about something very tactical like we talked at level 1, which is ATS, applicant tracking system, or TMS, training management system, now what we're talking about is the the key definable business processes that you have in your company, and how we're going to help impact that, streamline that, optimize that, and in the end, help you do what's on level 4. So we take the elevator all the way up to the top, and now we're talking about what are the outcomes that you're going to be able to achieve with visibility software. What's the ROI you're going to be delivered? What are the KPIs that you're going to use to measure success? And so this is where we want to do the stair-step approach. So there were very few of you today that said, hey, Bob, we are at this level 4. In fact, only 9% of you that came today said that you're at level 4. So the key here, if you think about this, is how do you move from stage 1, level 1, which 22% of you said that you're at, to level 2, which is really starting to think about how do you map out the business challenges and value propositions that you have. And if you're at this level, then how do you move to the next level, which is really talking about the business process that you're helping your companies and clients optimize. And if you're at that level, then how do you move to the next level, which is helping focus on the outcomes and the ROI that's delivered. Because that's going to be key as you engage with any company out there today. So we just wanted to walk through that example. Now, I've looked at the registration list for today's webinar, and we have a lot of diverse companies at today's session. And what I wanted to do is go through 3 examples of 3 of you that are attending today, because I've spent a lot of time looking at your websites. I've looked at who's coming to the webinar. I always love to do that so I understand my audience. So one of the groups that's attending today offers an employee scheduling solution. So at one level, at the first level, level 1, they do offer a workforce management solution, and they can talk about the capabilities of a great workforce management solution. If you move to the level 2 that we're talking about for today's webinar, you're talking about what are some of the challenges that people have today that you're going to help them address. Well, employee retention is a big issue today. And so one of the things that this company does is provide flexible work scheduling capabilities, which is going to lead to employee success, employee satisfaction, and having the flexibility that they need. Now let's move that to level 3. Let's say one of their clients is a hospital or a healthcare system. The healthcare systems are totally challenged. In 2020, 2021, they have been totally challenged. And they have a real problem with managing the day of shift coverage that happens every day, making sure that they have enough people, the right resources, because most hospitals today are fully occupied, 100%, in terms of ER, in terms of ICU. And so being able to tie your solution into that is really important. And level 4 is what's the outcome? So if you've got this type of solution, you're able to reduce overtime by 35%, creating a savings of $2 million annually. So there's an example of taking this messaging hierarchy, positioning hierarchy that we just discussed, and applying it. Now, a number of you are also coming to today's webinar, and you offer RFID, radio frequency ID, tracking and barcode tracking systems. So again, if we just apply this level 1 through level 4 discussion and segmentation, we'd say, well, if you want to know what's best about our solution, let's talk about what we could do as far as capabilities that we provide for our RFID tracking system. That would be like a level 1. A level 2 would be, what are some of the major challenges I'm trying to address with this technology? Well, I'm missing supplies. And when I'm missing supplies, it's creating downtime for our manufacturing facilities. So now with RFID, I'm going to have total tracking visibility to all of my inventory, all of my supplies, all of my materials, wherever they're at. And I'm going to be able to track where they're at. So I'm never going to be in a situation where I don't have the right materials available that's going to cause us to have a production downtime. Now, if I move that forward to the next level, to a level 3, now I can start talking about, let me think about your supply chain process that you have at your manufacturing facility. And let's think about where RFID can really make a difference in terms of the tracking traceability that you need to have across that entire process. And then level 4 is, now that we've deployed our technology to actually help you achieve your goals, we can help you reduce your inventory by 25% because we know where all the inventory is, so we don't have redundant inventory at our manufacturing facilities. And that allows us to reduce our carrying costs by 10%. That's another great example of outcomes that are being driven. I'm going to show one more example. So a number of you are coming from companies that offer global payment processing solutions. So again, a level 1 would be, hey, we've got this global payments processing solution. It does all these things. It handles all these currencies. It handles all of these payment types. It's very good. It's global, and so forth. A level 2 would be, a lot of companies are really having a problem in terms of their receivables and their days outstanding that they have. So it's impacting their cash flow for the company. So our platform is going to help you manage all that. Our platform is going to help you optimize that. A level 3 example would be, hey, our platform really helps you accelerate your end-to-end payment and collection process. And let me show you how it does that. And level 4 would be, how do you actually help me reduce my receivables? And how do you help me increase my cash flow, my free cash flow I have as a company? So as you can see, as we've gone through these 3 examples, including the visibility one that we just went through, this is really a great definitive way to stair-step your positioning, your messaging, and to really figure out how you're going to make yourself not a nice-to-have solution, but a must-have solution for your clients. Now, Craig's going to talk about this next area that is really valuable, because now that you've gone through and created the messaging tree, if we call it, at the 4 levels, what do you do with this now?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Bob. So as Bob was mentioning, I'm one of the 2 managing partners in On-Demand Advisors, and my background has been in marketing, CMO. I've worked for many large organizations such as Sony, Microsoft, Levi Strauss, and helping them with their branding and their messaging. And Bob and I have been doing this specific system that we've perfected over the last 12 years at On-Demand Advisors. And in so doing, helping over 100 different companies in refining their messaging, we really crystallized on a very defined process. And it all starts with sitting down with you and having a conversation and looking at exactly what you have. And some of the first questions we look at, and typically I would say of the 100 companies that we've helped, 100 plus, 99% of them always are starting at the selling the drill and not selling the hole, to use that metaphor. So as you're looking at your own messaging today, I would ask you to think about, what are you actually selling? What are you selling? Are you selling the hole? Are you selling the drill? And when we look at the messaging, we say, okay, it's great that you started somewhere, you have a solution, you're selling it, so a solution or service, and you're selling it. And where is it today with respect to the messaging? And we roll up our sleeves and we work with you during a several-day workshop. And we'll talk about this on a separate meeting, but we work with you in a several-day workshop to craft a buyer-validated messaging survey. And so what do you hope to achieve out of that? Because what we typically find are people are very skeptical, saying, well, we know what the messaging is, we just need to tell it. Well, you know what your solution, what your service or solution does, but you don't know necessarily how your audience wants to consume it and use it. Hence, what is the whole in which they're trying to construct? So how do we go about doing these surveys is we start with identifying who your vertical market is, who the decision or influencer is, and we construct the questions. And there's typically about, even though the survey itself has about 25 questions, it's actually more like about 100, 150 questions to actually query the market and find out how exactly they're going to use this. We did this with multiple companies, and Bob referenced visibility software. We're going to reference visibility software again. But the visibility software, as Bob was showing, we're starting at that lowest elevator point, which was just selling very, very tactical elements of their solution. What we needed to do was elevate that messaging and sell it to the higher tiers, and to continue that metaphor, sell it to the executive floor of that elevator shaft. And to do that, we needed to change the messaging so that we offered a different value. So Bob, can you go forward a little bit? Perfect. So this is the basic structure that we go through. So we start with the buyer survey, and there's 5 major parts of the buyer survey. There's demographics. As I mentioned, we want to understand who the vertical market is, and we're gonna help you step through that. We're gonna have you pick and make some decisions on who that is. And we're gonna also say, well, who are the decision makers? Who are the influencers? Who do we want to create that value with? Then we're gonna understand what are the questions that we need to ask related to the process? How are they going about doing things? And then what we're going to want to know is, what are the pain that's involved today? They've got to have pain to some capacity. And we need to understand it from their perspective, not what the guesswork is within the 4 walls of our own room, or our own office. But we need to understand what the audience is feeling. And then what we need to do is convert that pain into value and present it so that we need them to tell us what the value is. And then we need to understand ultimately how to market that value to them. So there's a very defined process that we go through in order to establish what that messaging is. All right. So now we've got a mountain of data. Now the harder work comes in synthesizing that data and then presenting it back in a usable format. And Bob and I use a very simple approach where we want to keep it simple, we want to keep it focused, and we want to keep it intentional, so that when the audience sees who you are, both visually and in words, they understand what you stand for, they understand what you offer, they understand the solution that you're solving for them. So as we synthesize the data, we are presenting back to you a refined messaging strategy, a refined elevator pitch, a refined company value proposition, and a refined brand and image for the organization. And that's going to manifest itself in the right-hand column here where you see creating the content. It's going to manifest itself in your website. It's going to manifest itself in videos. It's going to manifest itself in ebooks. And those are the words. That is the again, back to those 3 things I said: the simplicity, the focus, and the intentionality. If you keep it focused there, then the elements that you're creating will be received, both understood from the value that the user is deriving, as well as what you stand for. Let's go forward a little bit, Bob. So here's another way to look at this. So we're going to understand your buyer, and we're going to go through the buyer intelligence survey. We're going to look at the top tier here. So we're going to go through the buyer intelligence survey, as I mentioned. We're going to establish what we call a core messaging document. And that core messaging document was what I talked about. It's going to be the elevator pitch, the core messages for that specific vertical, and what you're going to say. And it's going to be simple, it's going to be focused, and it's going to be intentional. And that will be an internal document that you use both in marketing and sales to engage each one of your vertical markets. Then what we're going to do is create for you a buyer engagement roadmap. And that's going to be the elements for which that core messaging document are going to be translated into marketing and sales tools for which the buyer can understand and see you as a solution to their pains. All right. And then we're going to, at that point, we're going to put it out in the market. That's in our second tier, the middle tier here. At that point, it's going to manifest itself into the website. It's going to manifest itself into a sales playbook. It's going to manifest itself into webinars. And at that point, and you can see, that will translate into the leads. It'll translate into the opportunities. It'll translate into the sales. Bob, please go forward. And here's an example, steering back to visibility software. Now, what we did with visibility software is exactly the process that Bob was describing and that I was stepping everybody through. In that we understood from them what they were selling, and what they were selling at the time was a drill. They were selling their solution features and functions, and they were at that first, again, use that metaphor that Bob talked about earlier. They were at the level 1, which was just the most basic elements, but they weren't speaking to the executive staff. What they realized after our conversations and our guidance was that they sold to the executive level. They not only would find a more receptive audience, but they would actually be able to increase the price that they sold their solution for. So we shifted the conversation as we built out the survey. We shifted the conversation to querying the executive staff as to what would be the pains and values that they would derive. Then from there, we rebranded the messaging. We rebranded what they stood for visually, as you can see here from a personality standpoint. And we stayed aligned to showing the audience, the executive staff, that what visibility stood for was a talent management solution, and that it was going to drive a certain level of ROI for their company. And in so doing, we built basically the entire fabric of how visibility engages the market. And this then informed everything, sales tools to how the sales conversations occur, all the way down to the contracts that they're using. So let's go forward a little bit. So as we steer back to the metaphor here, just to emphasize, just to say, circle back to what I was explaining on visibility. Visibility started on the level 1 messaging. They were in the first floor. They were selling features and functions, as Bob pointed out in some of those screenshots. And where we evolved them to was really level 3 and level 4. And we want to sell both of those, because even though the decision maker is on level 4, the senior executives, there were influencers who we needed to speak to on level 3. So the goal was to evolve and migrate that messaging and the image of who visibility was, so that it resonated in a more focused, intentional way with the right audience. So that's where we are now with visibility software after we're getting engaged for a year with them, and we're still working with them, creating amazing work and creating amazing outcomes. And so with that, Bob, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thanks very much, Craig. Excellent. So Craig did a really good job of talking about some of the most important work that we do, which is getting to the truth, getting to the validation of this messaging and positioning through the eyes of the decision makers, the buyers in the marketplace, which most companies don't do. Most companies just continue with lots of assumptions, but they don't validate that in a circular way back with the target audience. So that's a key. There's another element that some companies may find apply and may not, and that is what we talked about is creating the blue ocean. And so we just went through the process in terms of how we're creating the blue ocean for visibility software. There are still going to be those of you, though, that compete in the marketplace. So, for instance, a number of you today came to this webinar and you provide accounting solutions for government contractors. Those accounting solutions would be different than the horizontal accounting solutions like we had at Intech. They'd be more focused on what are the requirements and needs of somebody that needs to do government or DCAA reporting. And so consequently, a number of you came today looking for how do you change that? Another factor that you may have, though, is how do you strategically represent your company as a differentiated solution against another company? And so in terms of creating that blue ocean, I missed a slide here. One of the things that we want to talk about is sometimes you have to take your messaging that we go through and create and still look at how your messaging is going to win and your positioning is going to win against your competition. So if you're competing in working with defense contractors, you may say, well, the elephant in the room is Deltek. So how do we win with our messaging, with our strategy against Deltek, as an example? So that would be another consideration to think about. This whole webinar, though, everything we talked about is about creating your blue ocean. It's about that transformation, that metamorphosis to getting to where you want it to be. And what I want to do now is just ask for your feedback. See if this information resonated with what we talked about today, with you in terms of the needs that you came here. And if you'd be so kind to fill out the, check off one of the boxes here, let us know your thoughts. So what's your primary takeaway from today's webinar? Is it that you now are able to think about how you want to focus on your business challenges that you're addressing and your value propositions? Do you want to spend more time focusing on the business process that you're optimizing? Perhaps you want to spend more time focusing on outcomes and ROI. Perhaps you want to focus more on buyer validation for your existing messaging that you have. Or you may be coming here saying, hey, I was looking for great ideas, best practices, just wanted to get food for thought and think about this a little bit further. And thank you, everyone, for participating. It's really, really helpful to get that feedback as we go through today's webinar and really understand your perspective. And after we finish this questionnaire poll that we have, we're going to open it up for Q&A and look forward to your questions for Craig and I. Okay, let me go ahead and close this and share the results. Okay, 8% of you stated your primary takeaway is to look at focusing on the business challenges you address and the value that you deliver. 13% stated you'd like to focus on the business process that you're optimizing. 38%, the number one is to focus on outcomes and ROI delivered, which is great because that's where your decision makers are lying. 13% stated you'd like to focus on buyer validation. So if you got the messaging, or if you're going to get to the right messaging, the question is, how do you get that validation from your buyer? And then 29% stated this is great information or good information and food for thought. So thank you very much for participating in that poll. What we'd like to do at this time is open it up. We always appreciate all questions that you have today. And just go ahead and, if you would, post the questions over here, and Craig and I would be happy to address them. And let me go ahead and start opening up the first questions here. And this one is from, let me go to the top. As you think about the tree, do you see different levels matching up to different parts of the buyer's journey funnel? Great question. That's from Norma. So the question really gets down to is you have different levels that you're messaging to. One of the things that you may want to think about that we find effective is one of the options is to set up the messaging and even your website so that you can come in by persona. So for instance, when Craig and I were at Intact providing accounting solutions, we wanted to be able to have one buyer's journey, one set of messaging for CFOs. We wanted to have another set of a buyer's journey messaging for the controllers or for mid-managers in the finance department. And we wanted to have a third level for users, because users are really focusing on, is this easy to use? Does it help me get my job done? Is it easy to navigate? What are the things that are important for me to use this type of solution? So you get different levels here, and sometimes a good way to do that is to look at how do you actually address allowing people to come in at either different industries, different levels of the organization, maybe even different geographies, or by different solutions, and have a buyer's journey that's associated with providing them the right information at the time. And by the way, in our next webinar, Norma, we're going to be covering this in detail and giving you some examples, so appreciate that. Here's a question from Joe. And Joe says, let's see, do you address international differences for the same product? That's a good question. And largely, I think we work many times with companies that are distributing their products or solutions all over the world. And we can find that even though we may do that, let's say starting here in North America, when we take the product or solution to market in EMEA or in Asia Pac or in South America, we still need to go through a different process. And sometimes coming back to what Craig talked about as far as buyer validation, it's a great way to do that. We also do that when you're thinking about entering new markets. One of our clients is AvidXchange. They provided a solution, a phenomenal solution. We actually helped them win one market, which is the property management market, but then they wanted to start getting into other markets. So using what Craig went through, buyer intelligence, we helped them validate their solution, their value propositions with 5 other industries and decision makers in those industries. So it really helped them think through what's the right messaging, how it's unique, and then go international was the next step, and really think through what they need to do before they start adding a lot of money and expense in marketing and sales. But great question there in terms of looking at international perspective. Okay, next question, and this one is from Joyce. So Joyce wanted to know, basically, does this apply to services companies as well as product companies, this methodology that we just talked about? And the question is, or the answer I should say is yes. So what we found working with companies is that this process that we went through with you today, we work with many B2B services companies. Like we work with a company called ICUC, which is the Global Social Media Management Services Company in 35 countries. And we've gone through the whole process working with them to help penetrate and win in 12 different verticals, 12 different industries. And it also works with many different solution and product companies too. So good question, and I appreciate that very much, Joyce. This one is from Jerry. Jerry says, how can we assess whether our target audience is in a red ocean or blue ocean? That's a great question. I think what we find a lot of times when we work with business owners and entrepreneurs is by the nature of them creating a disruptive solution, they in many cases think that they're creating a blue ocean. And the truth is, when we go out and we do the type of buyer intelligence or market assessments that we do, we often find that there are many substitutions out there for that type of service or that type of product. So in many cases, it may still be a red ocean. It may be undiscovered, but you're still going to have to create your own blue ocean in terms of going through this process that we just went through today. Okay, let's do one more question. Seems like a long process. This is from George. Seems like a long process. How long does it take before I see results? Okay, did you want to take that one?
Sure, absolutely. So while we begin engaging with you to build out the survey, to build out the correct messaging, but what we do is we immediately start creating an entire track of buyer deliverables so that you can begin communicating with your audience immediately after you go through one of our workshops. Now, that said, what we end up doing, so within the first month, to answer your question, is you'd be seeing tangible results. But what we do, because the survey takes a number of weeks to complete, once the results are in and it's synthesized and we're able to convert it into usable move forward strategy, then we go back and we modify some of the documents that we've already created for you and the strategy so that you don't lose any time at the very beginning, but we optimize what we're doing with the survey within the first 2 months.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. This is another question that we have here, and this is from Jace. Jace basically said, what tweaks in positioning are there for a startup with no customers versus a company that has traction and many customers? And that's a great question. One of the things that we find that's interesting is that sometimes you need help facilitating how to build out your messaging hierarchy and tree that we talked about through the webinar today. And that's where we can provide a lot of value, even for startups, or if you're launching a new product, a new service. It's something we always do. But the thing I find that is most valuable, especially for early stage companies, is the buyer intelligence process that Craig talked about. Going out and really engaging buyers in an interactive way, your prospective buyers, and doing that because if you're a startup or if this is a new space, you really don't have the data points from sales that you can move off of. And so what you're really looking for is you're looking for a statistical review of your solution or your hypothetical solution before you engage with that. And the reason why I think it's even more important to do that when you're a startup or when you're in an early stage company is because you really don't have the money to invest in going down the wrong alley. So there are a lot of companies that want to enter a new space, new market, new product area, and they put in sales and marketing programs and they don't get the results they're looking for. If you're a startup company, you don't even have the money to do that. So you can't get from here to there. So I just think that buyer intelligence, as Craig walked through that today, is really important, but it's even more important when you're an earlier stage company. And then finally, there was a question that came from Joe, and Joe wanted to know, will the presentation for today be recorded and downloadable? And the answer is yes. So for everybody that's registered for today's webinar, we're going to be providing you with a link to the recorded webinar that we have for today. And you get a chance to share that with colleagues and with the other members of your management team, or review earlier or later. So the last thing we want to talk about is just what would be the next steps that you could consider from today's webinar. One of the things that we often do with most of our clients is create what we call the Revenue Acceleration Playbook. And that is essentially the plan that needs to be created to look at how you're going to systematically grow your revenue over the next year or two. And so this is something that we've, again, perfected over these years, and we've been very good at doing that. Most people have a plan, they just don't have the playbook on how the plan is going to occur and make that actionable for themselves and for their team. Another thing that you could do is looking at the strategic positioning and messaging program that we offer and say, how does that apply to your company? You may also want to validate through the buyer intelligence program some of the positioning and messaging that you have today. And then finally, creating the buyer engagement roadmap that keeps you in front of your prospects, keeps you in front of your audience on a month-to-month, week-to-week basis. It's really important to keep that cadence so they get a chance to understand and appreciate your value. So those are some next steps that you could think about in terms of the transformational process. As we mentioned earlier, too, when we started today's webinar, we've got these two new webinars coming up next month, which is how a sales-driven website is going to accelerate your sales cycle and revenue growth. That's going to be in September. And then in October, we're going to be talking about how a proactive, not a reactive, but a proactive partner program drives your revenue growth. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for that. Here is the contact information, email addresses for both myself as well as Craig. Obviously, you're welcome to visit our website, and should you want to reach out to us and have any specific questions, needs, or inquiries, please let us know, and we'll look forward to getting back to you, responding quickly to your needs. So on behalf of Craig, myself, and the entire On Demand Advisories team, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar on strategic positioning and messaging. I hope that you walked away with tremendous insight that you can now apply back to your company. Have a great day, everyone.